Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things I want to mention is it's a good idea to have hand and eye protection. Other than that, make sure you're in a safe area that you can climb underneath the front of the vehicle. Now once all that's completed, let's continue on underneath the hood. We're going to come right over to the radiator cap and make sure it's cool to the touch. Essentially, you didn't just come back from a nice ride. Assuming it's cool, go ahead and press it down, turn it counterclockwise, and remove it from the radiator. If you're having an issue trying to access those lower bolts, you can carefully climb underneath the front of the vehicle and remove this shield. For the shield, you're going to find several push clips, either making their way across the front, holding the bumper cover, across the center, around the rear, or even inside of the wheel wells. Remove all as needed. Once you have all of them out of there, go ahead and take this down. Now with that out of the way, we want to try looking for the drain or the petcock of the radiator. That's this area right here. You can see it has a little spout that comes out and a knob that you can turn counterclockwise to start letting the coolant drain. Keep in mind, you're going to want to make sure you have a nice collection receptacle underneath this area so you can recycle the fluid properly. Let's turn this counterclockwise. Let your coolant fully drain. That finished draining, so we can go ahead and close up that drain. You want to make sure that this is nice and tight. You don't want it leaking on you after we've completed this. Let's wipe that down. Now we'll make our way a little bit more towards the passenger side to the lower radiator hose where it connects onto the radiator. We'll go ahead and squeeze on this clamp, slide it out of the way, take the hose off of the radiator. Keep in mind there could still be coolant up in this area. Make sure you have your collection bucket under it. Now we can carefully pop this off of the radiator. If it feels as though the hose is stuck on there, typically you can use some sort of hose pick to break it free. Sometimes to remove the hose, you might need to use a hose pick to break it free. Just carefully get in between there without damaging the hose in any way. I'm just going to pull this so it's aiming down here. Make sure there's no more coolant inside the hose. Now let's go ahead and follow that lower radiator hose up to this position right here. You can find one more clamp, and that clamp holds the hose to the thermostat housing. Let's go ahead and grab that clamp. We'll squeeze it, slide it down, remove the hose. Now we can grab onto that hose. We're going to give it a little twist as we start pulling it down and away from the housing. Let's just have a quick look at that hose. Make sure it looks like it's soft and pliable and it doesn't look torn or worn in any way. Now let's have a look up in here. We're going to be looking for our 3 mounting bolt holes. You can see one right along here, one up in this corner, and then there's also going to be another one that's along the back side, right up in this upper corner. That one's a little bit harder to see on camera, so I'll just kind of show you on this. Here's the 2 that we can see, and then there's the hidden one. Now we can start removing all of our 10mm headed bolts. As you remove each bolt, make sure you give it a clear inspection. You want to make sure it's still going to be reusable. Assuming it is, go ahead and set it aside. Go ahead and grab onto this. We'll give it a little wiggle. There we go. Now we can get ready to start removing the housing from the engine. Now looking at the housing along where the passenger side of it would be, you can see that there's a rubber hose with a clamp. Go ahead and squeeze that clamp, slide it up the hose, and then remove the hose from the housing. Now I'll make my way up here. I'm going to try to break the hose free from the assembly. Now we can start removing our 3 10mm headed bolts that hold the assembly to the engine. You'll find one here. There's one if you follow it towards where the engine is. And then looking at this one, if you were to go directly up and over the top of this, you'll find the 3rd. Let's have a look at the new assembly so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You have this one that you could see. That one's a little bit hiding. And then like I said, if you were to follow this one, there it is. Now we can grab onto this. We're going to give it a little wiggle to try to break it free from the engine. Now what we need to do is go ahead and try to twist it and pull it down at the same time, because there is one more plastic line that goes down and into this. The tube that goes into this has an O-ring on it, and typically it likes to stick inside of there. So I'm just going to go ahead and tug on it, twisting a little bit along the way, and it should want to slide out over time. With that out of the way, let's have a closer look at the engine where it mounts to. Now, as you can tell on ours, we have a whole bunch of gasket maker in this area. We'll use a flat blade on this. Go ahead and scrape it right down so it's nice and clean. Now, once we have the base of this cleaned down so it doesn't have any more of the material on there, we're going to continue on to inspecting the tube and the rubber hose. Now, for the tube itself, you want to basically be looking at the rubber O-ring that's on it. Make sure it's soft and pliable and it doesn't look like it's torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Assuming it looks good, go ahead and wipe it down and move along to the hose. Now for the hose, you just want to grab onto it and you're going to give it a little squeeze. You want to make sure it's soft and pliable, and once again, it's not torn or worn. Both of these look good. I'll just go ahead and clean them down real quick, and then we can grab our unit. Once you have everything cleaned down, let's use a little bit of silicone paste right along that O-ring. It's just going to help it slide on there a little bit easier. Now it's going to be time to put our housing on there. We're going to go ahead and turn this to the point that we can see the seal. Just apply a thin amount of that silicone paste right along that seal. Now we can take this and put it into the engine. As we bring it up into position, we want to make sure that we slide that plastic line with the rubber O-ring right into this. Get that lined up. Now I'm going to carefully press it up. I'm trying to make sure that I don't bind that O-ring in any way. That's part of the reason why I use the lubricant. All right, I felt it slide right on. That feels good. Now I can grab all three of my mounting bolts. We'll start them in, snug them up, and then we'll torque each of them to 8.7 foot-pounds. Go ahead and start it in there. We're going to line up the bolt hole, start it in a couple threads. Continue on with all the rest. Now at this point, you just want to double check that you torqued all three of those mounting bolts. Also double check to make sure your line's in. After that, we can move over to the hose. We'll slide that on, put our clamp on. Once you have it slid on, go ahead and grab that clamp. We'll slide it down into position. It's time to get started on installing our thermostat housing. Now before we go ahead and put this on there, we want to add a little bit of lubricant along the rubber O-ring. I'm just going to use some silicone paste. We'll put a little bit on and then spread it around. We only need a thin amount. Now we can slide this into position. Grab all three of your mounting bolts, start them in, and then snug them up. Now let's torque each of these to 7.2 foot-pounds. Now let's take these wires right here. You can see they have a little tab. That should actually push into right there. Now it's time for our lower radiator hose. Slide that up and onto the thermostat housing. Now we can bring the other side over and put it onto the radiator. Let's flex this, slide it onto the radiator. Make sure both sides are bottomed out as closely as they can to either the thermostat housing or the radiator. Once they are, go ahead and put those clamps back into their original positions. Once you're sure everything's torqued properly, let's get our shield back up, keeping in mind that the shield slides underneath the front bumper cover. There we are. Once you have it in position, reinsert all of your mounting push clips. Don't forget the ones in the wheel well. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and fill up the cooling system. If you don't have a special tool to do it, you at least want to make sure you have a funnel to help you burp out any air that's in the system. Go ahead and use the manufacturer's specified fluid. We're going to go ahead and fill this up, and then we're going to run the vehicle till we hear the cooling fans turn on and there's plenty of heat coming from inside the vents. Okay, so at this point we went ahead and we ran the vehicle until the cooling fans turned on. We double checked inside the passenger compartment and we had plenty of heat. We made our way back out here, and in the funnel I can see that I had no more air coming from the system, so I went ahead and got it out of the way. Now we can take our radiator cap, we're going to put it in place, push it down onto the radiator, turn it counterclockwise until it stops, make sure it's secure. Check the level in your overflow tank and add it as needed.